This is the Solid Signal podcast for the week of October 10th, 2022. And, first things first, I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about last week's podcast, and I know I wasn't the only person who mentioned the whole issue of what House of the Dragon was doing and how you couldn't see it. Well, it turns out this past week's episode, I'm glad to say, was a lot brighter. Maybe not tonally, but at least you could see what was being done. That doesn't necessarily mean it was perfect, but at least you could see whether or not it was good. But let's get back to business. The subject of this week's podcast is the future of antennas. Now, I tend to do a podcast like this, every 2 or 3 years, and my opinions change a little bit, but that's what, forecasting the future is really all about. And it's not terribly surprising, but I want to tell you where I think we stand today as far as the future of antennas and why I think that way and why, depending on who you are, you shouldn't really worry about it. The first thing that I want to say is, according to my research, about 15% of homes have over-the-air antennas at this point. That's down from about 90% a couple of generations ago, and it continues to drop as people are a little bit more focused on streaming and continue to be focused on pay television and all sorts of things. So the question is are we going to see a continued drop or steep drop, or what sort of change having to do with over-the-air antennas and what we're going to see with them? Of course, forecasting the future is going to be very hard, and this is just my opinion, of course. One isn't really very sure all the time, but okay. I tend to think that we are close to the bottom when it comes to over-the-air antenna penetration, in terms of, that is to say, the number of people who have over-the-air antennas. I don't think that number is going to drop very much, but at the same time, I do not think it's going to go up. I think it's going to continue to drop slowly over time, and it has to do with why people have over-the-air antennas. Of course, some people have over-the-air antennas because it's an inexpensive way to get live television. Once you put up the antenna, it's completely free. And the people who rely on it that way are not going to change. However, that tends to be the perspective of an older generation, a generation that isn't going to be here forever. Of course, none of us are going to be here forever. But that generation that feels that way, that they can get by with just over-the-air antenna, is not going to can dominate, and younger generations are not going to see the economics of it exactly the same way. Another reason that you might get an over-the-air antenna is because you are too far away from internet service, but you're still close enough to get broadcast. This is the case for some of our rural and agricultural customers. If you happen to be on a large farm, well, maybe cable doesn't reach all the way in, or you cannot get satellite because of the obstructions that are there. And so you're going to put in an over-the-air antenna, and that's going to really work for you. That, I think, is going to kind of shrink and eventually go away, because I think that eventually we're going to see more and more internet penetration. Perhaps the government will sponsor some initiatives to get internet to rural areas, or perhaps it's just going to continue to get less and less expensive to bring internet, satellite-based internet, or some other over-the-air based internet. And streaming is going to begin to grow in those areas, and the need for over-the-air antennas is going to be lower. Now, the third group of people, and this is really a very small group, is those folks who are interested in the next generation of television, it's called Nextgen TV or ATSC 3.0. You can read articles about it, and there's going to be people who are going to tell you it's the next big thing. I've been pretty clear on the Solid Signal blog that I do not think it's the next big thing. It has huge headwinds at this point, and I have to wonder if it's ever going to become the standard for broadcasting, no matter how hard a few organizations try to push it. The enthusiast crowd, and Solid Signal caters to the enthusiast crowd, of course, are very important. And it would be great to think that we could see Nextgen TV really begin to take off, and it becomes something that people wanted and that they got real quality out of it. I just don't see it. So where does that leave the antenna outlook? I think For the foreseeable future, we're going to see continued just slow diminishing in size of that market. I think there's going to be some consolidation. We may see a brand or two drop out. I don't know. But really, you're not going to see this big jump in antenna purchases unless something really, really big happens. That's a shame because I think that over-the-air antenna is important. I think it's a great way to keep people informed. But if the internet can do the same thing and it's something that everybody can get reasonably at a reasonable price and everybody has access to, then fine. Because the big thing about over-the-air antenna is that everybody has access to it. Like I said, you put up an antenna and it doesn't cost you anything after that. And you have the right to get it. You do not have to have any sort of, special equipment beyond that antenna, and the tuner is built into every TV. So, that said, I think, it would be a shame to see over-the-air antenna go completely away. But if that content migrates to the internet, and as I said, if it's something where everybody gets fair access to it, then so be it. That's the way it's going to go. There are, at least for the next several years, however, a couple of places that you're really going to still want to have an over-the-air antenna. And the funny thing is, that really coincides with a lot of our solid signal customers. If you happen to be on a boat, then you've got a couple of choices for entertainment. Couple of choices. If you can stay within 5-ish miles, sometimes less, of shore, then you can take advantage of cell phone service and you'll get something. If you've got the money, then you can get satellite-based TV or satellite-based internet between 50 and 100 miles offshore, which is more than most folks are going to need. Or if you can stay within 50 miles of a major city, then, you can put up an over-the-air antenna and it's going to work. And you're going to have live TV when you settle in for the night. It's not that bad when you think about it. Most people don't go on a boat just to watch television, but sometimes you want to kind of cool off and, relax for a little while before going to sleep. An over-the-air antenna can be great for that. So keeping that in mind, over-the-air antennas for boats are still a really great idea. Another area where it's important and where I think that we're going to continue to see strong use of over-the-air antennas is in RVs. It's a shame, but the current broadcast standard, you can't use an antenna if you're going more than about 15 miles an hour. But once you're settled in for the night, you can generally get great reception, 50 to 60 miles away from a major city, which is, where you're going to find a lot of RV parks. And that reception may be easier for you to get than cell reception because, on land, you really need to be about 1.5 miles away from a tower in order to get decent service. However, you can be 50 miles or 60 miles away from broadcast towers and still get great television service. So while I think it's a great idea for our current solid signal crowd, I'm not real optimistic for the rest of the planet. Or the United States, at least. The outlook for antennas overseas, especially in Europe, is very different than it is in the U.S., and that's maybe the subject of another podcast. So long term, I would say I don't see a lot of change. I don't see a lot of things happening in the next year to year and a half, certainly. But as we look forward, I do think there is going to be a reason to reevaluate the use of over-the-air antennas, and it's a shame. Then again, every technology has its ups and downs. It was really, I want to say it was only about 10 years ago that the last use of telegraphy, the telegraph, which was so popular in the 1900s, and even going back to the 1800s, that they stopped using telegraph lines. So now, you look at television and you say, okay, television dominated the 20th century and into the 21st, but maybe it's not going to make it all the way through the 21st century. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily mean you will lose access to your local content, only that you'll get it a different way. At least that's the hope. Anyway, that's about it for this considerably less controversial Solid Signal podcast. Please do me a favor, like, subscribe, and comment anywhere that you get this podcast. Always makes me look good to my bosses, and I will see you again next week.